Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Eugene and this channel is dedicated to teaching of programming and software development. In the previous lessons, we already learned about one type of flow control statements. This is the if command. It is called a flow control statement because it controls the flow of the program. As you remember, if the condition is evaluated to true, one block is executed, otherwise the other. This is the 8th Programming Fundamentals lesson, and in this lesson, we are going to learn a few new commands that control the flow of the program, that will give us new tools in order to write more complex programs. Today, we are going to learn about loops. First, let's understand why we need loops. Imagine that you have an array of 1000 elements, and you need to perform the same operation on every element of the array. We could do it by accessing every element in the array separately, but writing this would require a lot of lines of code, and what's more important, this might be even impossible if we don't know the number of elements while writing the program. Another example is performing a calculation that requires multiple iterations until the result is received. Also, we may want to get the user input and do some tasks depending on his input until he types something like quit, for example. All these examples require repeating the same operation multiple times, and we don't know in advance when we should stop. The solution is to use a loop. A loop allows us to repeat the same operation multiple times as long as a certain condition is met. For example, consider that we want to calculate the sum of all numbers from 1 to 10. Of course, there is a simple formula to do this, but let's try to do it using a loop. To do this, we are going to have two variables. One that stores the sum and another one will be the current number that we are adding to the sum. The idea is that we need to add every number from 1 to 10 to the sum variable. So first we initialize those two variables. Then, as you can see in the diagram, we check if num is less than or equals to 10, because when it gets larger we should stop adding it to sum. And if the number is still not bigger than 10, we add it to the sum and add 1 to num. After we did this, we go back to the condition and check again if the number is less than or equals to 10. And we continue like this until num becomes 11. At that point, the condition will evaluate to false and will get out of the loop. This is basically the idea of loops. Now we are going to see different types of loop. While is one of the types of loop that we can use, and from a syntactical point of view, this is probably the simplest one. As you can see, we use the while keyword and then a condition. As long as the condition is met, the block within the loop will repeat. It's important to understand that it's our responsibility to make sure that the loop will finish at some point. In other words, that the condition is evaluated to false. Otherwise, we are going to stay in the loop forever. Let's use the while loop to calculate the sum of the numbers from 1 to 10. We'll declare a variable to store the sum, which will be initialized with 0. Now, since we are dealing with a loop, we need to understand what the condition of the loop will be. In other words, at what point we will stop running the loop. In our case, we need to go from 1 to 10 and add every number to the sum variable. So in this case, we need to stop the addition operation when we reach 10. So we declare another variable named current number, which will be advanced after every iteration. When the current number variable is bigger than 10, we should stop running the loop. As you can see, the condition looks like this. As long as the current number is less than or equals to 10, we perform the body of the loop. In the body of the loop, we add the current number variable to sum. And what's important is that at the end of every iteration, we advance current number by 1. First, we need to do it because we want to go to the next number in the next iteration. And second, if we don't do it, the loop will run infinitely because current number will never become bigger than 10. Once we are out of the loop, the sum variable contains the result. Do-while is another type of loop that, just like the while loop, has a condition. And the loop continues as long as the condition is met. But do-while has an important difference. In a do-while loop, we always have at least one iteration of the loop. This happens because the condition is located in the end of the loop. This type of loop is convenient, for example, when we need to get some input from the user and we always need to get at least one time, and then keep getting it until the user asks to quit. In the example you see, we print all numbers from 0 to 9, and as you can see, we will first print the number, increment the current number, and then we will check the condition. As long as the current number variable is less than 10, we will continue with the loop. Now we are going to learn about the for loop. This is not a difficult type of loop, but for beginners its syntax might be a little confusing. But once you understand the idea, it gets very easy and natural. As you have seen, when we were writing a while loop, we first initialized a variable. Then in the beginning of every iteration of the loop, we checked if the condition was met. And at the end of every iteration, we changed the variable as a preparation for the next iteration that could also make the loop stop. Now, this pattern is very common. So there is a special loop that contains these three parts as part of the loop definition. This is the for loop. It consists of 4 parts. The first part is the initialization. That's where we can declare a variable that will be advanced on every iteration. You can see in the diagram that the initialization part is done only once and before the actual loop. The second part is the condition. As you can see in the diagram, this is where we check if the condition is met in order to decide whether to go inside the loop or not. Then, as you can see in the diagram, we have the commands that run as part of the loop's block. After the commands of the loop run, we should make an update as a preparation for the next iteration. In the while loop, we did this inside the loop, but as you can see, the for loop has a dedicated place for this. This part runs before every iteration. After the update part runs, again the condition is checked, then the commands run, then again the update part runs, and so on. As you can see, the for loop contains the same steps as we had in the while loop, but it has a very specific structure. In the example, you can see that we first declare a variable named I, and we assign it with the value 1. This is the initialization part. Then we check if I is less than or equals to 10. Since it is, we enter the loop and print the value 1. Then we run the update part, which increments I by 1. And now again, we go to the condition part and see that I is still less than or equals to 10. So we enter the loop. At some point, we update I and it becomes 11. Then we check the condition, which is not met. So we exit the loop and continue with the commands after the loop. Now, there are 2 special commands that we can use inside loops. I don't really recommend using them at this point, but you definitely should learn them, and there are some cases when they can be used. So, break stops the execution of the loop completely at the break line and goes outside of the loop. It doesn't matter if the condition of the loop is still met. The loop will stop. The next executed line will be the line after the loop. Continue stops the current iteration and goes to the next iteration while running the update part in case we are in a for loop and checking the condition. In other words, it skips the rest of the lines in that iteration and goes to the next one. In the first example, once I reaches 4, we will exit the loop, and only 1, 2, and 3 will be printed, while in the second example, we will just skip 4 and continue to the next number, so all numbers except 4 will be printed. Now, let's go to VS Code to practice. Alright, now we are in VS Code and I already created a console app. As a first exercise, let's try to calculate the number of ones, for example, in an integer array. So first let's define the array. Alright. Now that we have the array, let's understand what we need to do. So first, we need to define a variable to store the number of ones in the array. So we'll create a variable named count that will be initialized with 0. And now what we need to do, we need to walk over the array using a loop, and if the element is 1, we need to add 1 to count. Alright, so let's start with writing the loop. We'll use the for loop this time. So as you remember, the first part is the initialization part. So we are going to create a variable named I, which means index, that we will increase on every iteration, and using this variable, we will walk over the array. Alright, now after we initialized I, we need to write the condition. In this case, the condition is I is less than array length, which means that we will continue as long as I is smaller than the length of the array. All right, and the third part is the update part, is what we do after every iteration and before we check the condition. In our case, we need to increment I. All right, now what we need to do in the body of the loop. As we already said, we need to check if the value of array at index I is 1, then we need to add 1 to count. And we will do it for every index I until we reach the end of the array. Now in the end, let's print count and see how it's working. All right, now let's execute it. Okay, as you can see, count is 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, looks correct. Now let's see another example. Using the same array, let's try to find the maximum of this array. So I'll delete this, and now let's try to solve this problem. So in order to find the maximum, let's try to understand what we need to do. So we need to walk over the array and store the number that we currently think is the maximum. And if we find a number bigger than the current maximum value, we need to update the maximum. And so on until we reach the end of the array. All right. So to begin with, let's declare a variable to store the current maximum. Now, there is a question here. What should be the initial value of max? So probably the best solution is to store the first value of the array in max, because if we store something else, for example, we store 0, we might find that the array will have all numbers negative. So, and the answer will be wrong, because in the end we will think that the maximum is 0, while the maximum is some negative number from the array. So it is probably best just to start with the first element. Now let's write the loop that will walk over the array. All right, just like before, let's use the for loop. And this time we are going to start with 1 and not 0, because the element at index 0 is already stored in max. All right, again, we walk over the array until we reach its length. Okay, now what we need to do, for every element in the array, we need to check if the element is bigger than max. And if it is, we need to store the element. All right? And we are going to continue like this until the end of the array. So when we finish with the loop, the result should be in the variable max. Now let's print it. All right. And as you can see, the printed value is 8. Actually, by coincidence, it's the last item in the array, so let's add, for example, one more value somewhere here to make sure that it's not a mistake in the algorithm. All right, let's run this again. And this time, as you can see, the maximum is 9. And even though we continued after that, none of the values was bigger than 9. So it seems that the program is working. All right, now let's do another exercise. This time, the exercise will be like this. We will get a string from the user, and we are going to calculate the number of A's in that string. All right, so let's delete this. So the first thing that we should do, we are going to ask the user to enter a string. Please enter a string. All right, now we need to read that value. All right, so now str contains the red string. Now, how we can count the amount of A's in that string? Just like we did with arrays, we need to iterate over the characters of the string, and if we see the letter A, we need to add 1 to a count variable. So first let's declare a count variable and initialize it with 0. But this time, let's use the while loop. So to use a while loop, we need to declare an index variable before the loop, because it doesn't have the initialization part like a for loop. All right, so we'll do it like this: int I equals 0 again. And now let's write the loop like this. We'll say while I is less than str length, a string has a length property, and while I is less than str length, we need to do something. But no matter what we are doing, before the end of the iteration, we need to increment I. All right. Now, what we need to do in every iteration, we actually need to check if the string at index I equals A. And if it is, we need to increment count. All right. Pay attention that A is written between single quotes here and not double quotes, because this is not a string but a character. All right, and in the end, let's print count. Okay, now let's run this. Okay, so we are asked to enter a string, and let's type something like this. I think we have 3 A's. All right. Press enter, and as you can see, the count is 3, which is correct. All right, so we learned another very important topic today, which gives us new skills and capabilities. We still have a lot to learn, so thank you for watching and see you in the next lesson.